public service, it was in my DNA, is in my DNA. It was the most important decision that I've ever made in my life, in my first 22 years. If I was on active duty on 9/11, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today. It's the biggest crime ever committed in the history of Buffalo. Hands down. Quite frankly, I came to the determination that there's really nothing better to do or no better way to spend my time for a few years before going to law school than serving my country.
Hey, everybody, and once again, we are back for another great episode of the Flow Syndicate Podcast. And today we have a very special guest. I'm really excited for this one, former Erie County District Attorney John Flynn. John, thank you so much for coming on the Flow Syndicate Podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate it.
So let's get right into it. So you grew up in Western New York.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about, your experience in Western New York. If you have family here, is your family always here or came from anywhere else? What was that like, your childhood?
Sure. My family, for at least a couple generations ahead of me, was always from Buffalo area. My family on both my mother's side and my father's side were both from South Buffalo originally. Again, my parents always told me that I'm 100% Irish. I don't believe that, quite frankly, because no one's 100% anything.
Yeah, pretty much.
And also I tend to tan too well too. I'm dark, so I don't believe that I'm 100% Irish.
You see, I'm Italian, but I'm unfortunately white as chalk sometimes.
I'm a little darker, and I can tan well, so. But in any event, I'm going with 100% Irish, all right? Especially coming up here with St. Patrick's Day. So again, my family, my family came here, both sides of my family from Ireland. Typical, Irish heritage here, in Western New York. Came to the First Ward initially, then went to South Buffalo, and then my mother's family moved to Lackawanna. So my mom grew up in Lackawanna, and my dad grew up in South Buffalo. And so I was, born and raised in South Buffalo. My father ended up moving out to East Aurora when I was a young child, and I actually grew up in East Aurora and had pretty much my entire childhood there in East Aurora.
Oh, very nice. And did you play any sports growing up?
Yeah, I played everything. You name it, I played it. I played. Hockey, football, baseball, basketball, soccer, in a golf, So I did everything. When I got to high school, I went to East Aurora High School. When I got to high school, I made the mistake actually of, trying to focus on one sport, thinking that I might be good enough to go higher than high school, which was quite frankly a pipe dream. And so I focused on basketball. In high school, and I only played, high school basketball. Again, that was a mistake that I made, quite frankly. When I look back on it now, I wish I would have continued to play more sports in high school than I did, because again, I thought that if I focused on one, that I might be able to, go somewhere. It obviously didn't work out, and it was looking back on it, I wish I would have, done something differently and actually played more sports in high school.
Yeah. Well, so then going into the Navy, right, in your service, was there anything in your childhood or even through sports, whatever, maybe competitive nature, anything about you specifically from your childhood that said, the Navy, my childhood put me on that path to consider going in?
Yeah. I mean, I would say to that, Nick, that public service, just in general. I was kind of, brought up mainly through my family with an idea of always being a public servant someday. And it was instilled upon me growing up that, public service is important. Like I said, I got that from my family. My father, what's ironic here too is that, none of my family, except, I had one uncle, but none of my family was in the military, or military people. Like I said, I had an uncle who was in the Army for a couple of years, but there was no Navy at all. And there was really no sense of military history in my family at all. But there was public service. My father was an attorney. He ran for the New York State Senator, as a New York State Senator, New York State Senate. Yep. But when I was a young child, he wasn't successful, but, he was always kind of involved, as a lawyer here in Buffalo, in politics, just helping candidates out, serving as treasurer for a few political candidates. My uncle, my father's brother, was a former South District councilman here in the city of Buffalo, and he was, involved in politics throughout his adult life.
Sure.
My mother's brother was actually the district attorney. My uncle, Ed Cosgrove, was the DA back in the 70s. Yeah. So I remember when he ran for DA, I was, helping out in that campaign as a young kid. And so, obviously I had two uncles who were elected officials. I had other relatives, my mother's cousins, were Supreme Court judges. So, I had a number of people in my family.
Oh, sure. Plenty.
Who were in politics, who were elected officials. And so it was in my DNA, and is in my DNA, quite frankly, all along, to be involved in public service. And so, I knew when I graduated college that I wanted to go to law school. That was kind of a given for me. But I didn't want to go right away. I wanted to take some time off and do something before I went into law school. And so, quite frankly, I came to the determination that there's really nothing better to do, or no better way to spend my time for a few years before going to law school than serving my country. And that's how I picked the Navy. That's why I went in the Navy, because I wanted to serve my country. I wanted to do something productive and meaningful before I went to law school. And I tend to like the ocean. I tend to like the beach, and so I picked the Navy.
Yeah, who doesn't?
And it was by far, well, up until that point, it was the most important decision that I've ever made in my life, in my first 22 years at that point. And so not only at that point was it the most important decision I ever made in my life, but looking back on it now, it was the second best decision I ever made in my life after marrying my wife.
Yep. That's a great answer. Fantastic answer. Yep. Was there any experience in the military that you personally remember where you were like, oh, this is a dangerous situation?
Not really.
Okay.
Be honest with you. I was fortunate that I never served in any combat situations or combat areas. I've had a number of different jobs in the Navy, and I actually had two separate active duty stints in the Navy. So my first foray into the Navy was, like I said, right out of college. I graduated college, and for the listeners and viewers out there, just so you know, there's three ways to become an officer in the military, whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, whatever. The the first way is to go to one of the service academies, either West Point or Annapolis, or the Coast Guard Academy or the Air Force Academy.
Yep.
So you can go to one of the academies. That's number one. Number two is that you can do ROTC. You can go to a college that has an ROTC program and serve in and join the ROTC while you're in college, and then when you graduate, you then go into your respective branch of service. That's the second way. The third way is what I did, all right? The third way is through officer candidate school. And all the branches of the military have an officer candidate school. And, basically you just go to college like a normal college student. You do your 4 years or whatever, all right? And then when you graduate college, you're eligible to apply for officer candidate school.
Sure, okay.
You got to have a college degree, though, okay? So it's just like the Naval Academy or ROTC, where you got to graduate first. So that once you graduate college, you then can apply to officer candidate school. So that's what I did. When I graduated, I immediately applied to Navy Officer Candidate School. I was accepted, and then I basically went off to the Navy at the end of the summer there of my of 1988 when I graduated college. And so I went to Officer Candidate School. I became like a regular shipboard officer. I was a supply officer. And so once I finished my training and my schooling, then I was assigned to a ship out of San Diego, California. And we did go overseas. So I did serve overseas, but when, and I did serve during the first Gulf War too. But
that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, so I did serve during the first Gulf War, but my ship was actually over in the Western Pacific, and we never went into the Persian Gulf. My ship stayed in the Western Pacific, where we were in the South China Sea, where I went to Philippines, I went to Thailand, Japan, Korea. So we stayed in that area right there, and we were never called to go into the Persian Gulf. So while I served during the first Gulf War, we never went into the Persian Gulf. So to be perfectly honest with you, we never went into any area that I would deem dangerous at all. And quite frankly, and again, unlike the Army and Marine Corps, you're not storming the beaches. All right, you're in there, you're on the Navy, you're on the ship, and it's a situation where, like I said before, I earlier when I said how I suntan well, I get to lay out in the ship and suntan, and eat steak and lobster. Okay.
No, but I mean, still,
so to be perfectly honest with you,
you're serving still, but yeah.
So it was, it was good duty, and it was a great experience. And
that's
awesome.
Like
I said, I saw. I saw the world. I saw like I said before. I went to Korea. I went to Japan. I went to the Philippines, Thailand, Hawaii, all over the Western Pacific there, and it was just it was a phenomenal experience and something that I look back upon as some of the best years of my life.
Oh, very cool, very cool. So what happened right after the Navy? What was the next step for you?
So I came back to Buffalo. So I finished my commitment, and I came back to Buffalo to go to law school, and I went to University of Buffalo Law School. It was a great time where I met my wife, I got married, started a family, and then I stayed in the reserves, the Navy reserves, during law school. So I got off active duty, came back here to go to law school, stayed in the reserves all during law school. And then when I was about to graduate law school, I'm still an active reservist now in the Navy. The Navy basically came to me and said that there's a need for regular naval officers who have prior experience to serve in the Navy JAG Corps, the Judge Advocate General's Corps, which are Navy lawyers.
Okay.
All right. So you see that TV show JAG. Okay, that's what
it's based
That's what JAG
off.
stands for.
Yeah.
JAG stands for Judge Advocate General, and that is the formal name for attorneys who serve in the military, whether it's, again, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines.
Any one of them.
Coast Guard, doesn't matter. They're all called JAGs. Actually, in the Marine Corps, they're called Judge Advocates. There's no G on the end of it, but the rest of us have JAGs on the end of it. And so, the majority, though, of attorneys who go in the Navy just go in right out of law school. They never have any prior service or experience, especially being an officer on board a ship. And so, they kind of gave me the pitch and said, hey, the Navy really needs this, and, you would be a great fit. So I did. It was very easy. All I did was just change my specialty from being a supply corps officer to being a JAG officer. Mm-hmm. And once I graduated from law school and took the bar exam and passed the bar exam, I went back on active duty as a Navy JAG.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I had, like I said, 2 stints of active duty separated by law school. Mm-hmm. But again, I had been in the reserves all during law school, so I really had no break in service from when I graduated college.
Yeah.
And so I went back in the Navy as a Navy lawyer on active duty. This time I had all shore duty in the States. I didn't go on a ship or I didn't go overseas at all. Well, I mean, I did go, I went overseas to Italy for a case, but I served here stateside. I went to Pensacola Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida, and I served for 3 years there. And then I went to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, and I had the privilege of being on staff as a staff attorney there at the Naval Academy for 2 years. And then after 5 years, 3 in Pensacola, 2 in the Naval Academy, I decided I'm going to get back out and come back to Buffalo. And I did. So I actually got out twice. And I joke to people, especially as we're sitting here when it's 20 degrees outside and there's been snow on the ground for the past month. I kind of joke to people that I'm probably certifiably crazy because my first duty was in San Diego, and I left San Diego to come back to Buffalo. And then my second stint was in Florida, and I left Florida to come back to Buffalo. So not only did I leave beautiful San Diego and sunny Florida to come back to Buffalo, I did it twice.
People are thinking you got a screw loose or something.
I did it twice, which is unbelievable. But I like I said, I'm earlier on when we started this off, born and raised here, family's from here. I'm a Buffalo guy.
Yeah.
And so, when I retire, I'm probably, for a few months of the year, gonna go back to California. But I'm always gonna come back to Buffalo. And because I'm a Buffalo guy, and this is where I'm from, and this is where, I say that I got public service in my DNA. I've also got Buffalo in my DNA as well.
Yep.
And so that's why I came back here, and I came back in 2001. It's funny, not funny, but it's kind of ironic how life takes their turns and events in life kind of dictate where you go.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah.
I got off active duty on my second stint. I left the Naval Academy to come back home in June of 2001. That is, if you do the math here, 3 months before 9/11. Okay?
Yep.
So 9/11 was September 11th, 2001. And so I got off active duty 3 months before 9/11. And if I was on active duty for, on 9/11, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today.
Wow.
Yeah. I probably would have.
I could see that.
Well, I know I would have remained on active duty because, one, they weren't letting anyone out really at that time.
Sure.
But even if they would have let me out of a sense of just duty to my country, I wouldn't have gotten out, and I would have stayed in, and I probably at that point, Nick, I had over 8 years of active duty, and I had over 4 years of reserve time. So at that point, I had over 12 years of service in.
It's a lot.
And if, the active duty was really the important part, the 8-year part there. And so if I would have stayed in and done one more tour, that would have took me to over 10. And at that point, you say to yourself, well, I've got over 10 years in. I might as well get 20, and get for your pension purposes. Mm. And so there's a good chance I never would have got out, and I would have made it a career on active duty. But as life course takes you, I got out 3 months prior, and
the timing on that is
I was home here in Buffalo. I was working at the DA's office. I was an assistant district attorney. Now, I was still in the reserves. So I joined the reserves immediately once I got off active duty in June. Mm. So I was in the reserves on 9/11, but I never got recalled back to active duty. Even during the build up to Iraq and Afghanistan and all that, I stayed in the reserves the entire time. I was never recalled to active duty. Obviously, if I was, I would have went, but I never got recalled. I never had to go back on active duty during the entire time of the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts that came about after 9/11.
Wow. Yeah. Now, so assistant district attorney to becoming then the district attorney, what was that path like for you in starting out as an assistant DA? What are some, let's even say like personality traits, what are some leadership styles and traits that have helped you excel in your career and also just on the job? What separates the winners from people who don't climb up?
Well, there was a big gap in between there, though.
Fill it in.
There was a significant gap between, actually, 15-year gap. There was a 15-year gap between me being an assistant district attorney and then me being the DA. As far as leadership traits and characteristics in being an assistant district attorney, the biggest one is your independence and your ability to think on your feet and to be in court right away by yourself. Now, obviously, I was a little bit more seasoned than your typical assistant district attorney coming right out of law school. The typical assistant district attorney is a kid, and I'll just use the word kid because I got kids who are that age right now, and I call them kids. A kid, 25 years old, who went to law school right out of college. They went to college, went to law school right away, and then they come in as an assistant DA as their first job out of law school, who has not much life experience. They've had jobs and internships all along, but nothing permanent. And it's their first job as being a lawyer. And if you're an assistant district attorney, you're in court right away. I mean, it's like
You're getting out of your comfort zone.
jump in the
real quick.
water, you're swimming right away. I mean,
It's happening.
There's a couple-week training session, but that's it.
That's yeah.
And so, fortunately for me, I had 5 years as being a lawyer in the Navy, so I had a lot of experience. I tried a number of cases. I was in a courtroom all the time. And then on top of that, I had prior experience by being a regular shipboard officer in the Navy, where, my very first day aboard the ship, I was the division officer in charge of a division of about 80 Navy and Marine Corps members. So, I was thrown in the fire right away in the Navy on a ship. And then, as an assistant DA, you're in a courtroom right away. So the leadership qualities, though, and characteristics and traits are, independent abilities to handle the job immediately. And so those are the biggest takeaways and the biggest traits that you had to have by being an assistant DA. Now, like I said, I had a gap there, though, between being an assistant DA and being the DA of about 15 years. I served as an assistant DA for only about 2 years, a little less than 2 years, actually, and then left the office to go not only into private practice, but to go into politics. Because again, that public service DNA that I had,
Yeah, I was calling you.
and still, quite frankly, had to a certain extent, doesn't go away, is that brought me in the Navy right away, was still there by the time I, had gotten out of the DA's office as an assistant DA in 2002. And so it was in my mind to, go into politics, when I left in 2002.
Wow, that's interesting. Did you also have time? Would you serve as a judge too? Correct.
Yeah. So
Now, being on the bench, I got to imagine that is, it's a little different, right? It's the other side.
yeah, well, not really the other side. It's you're the referee. So you got two sides who are on the playing field, and you're now the referee trying to decipher and choose between both sides. So that was a great experience. Before I became a judge, though, my very first entree into public service, put aside the Navy, I ran for the town council in Tonawanda. So while I, was originally from South Buffalo, and I grew up in East Aurora, so I was a South Towns guy. When we got out of the Navy, I think my wife and I, and our family at the time, when I got out of the Navy 3 months before 9/11 in June of 2001, by this point, I had 4 kids. And so my wife is from Tonawanda, the North Towns. And so when we left the Naval Academy and got out of the Navy to come back home, my wife said to me, we've been traveling around the Navy all these years here now. I'm going to pick where we're going to live. We're going to live near my parents in Tonawanda. And I said, yes, dear. And that was the end of the conversation. And so we moved to Tonawanda. Yeah. And quite frankly, Nick, it's funny. I mean, if people who watch this and who are from Buffalo and are hearing this know that we're very segregated here.
Yes, we are.
You're either a South Towns person or a North Towns person. I joke to people, before I met my wife, I was never north of the locker room, okay? And for you who's young here, the old timers will know the locker room was a famous bar on Delaware Avenue in North Buffalo. Okay. So, everyone in my generation, knew the locker room. Okay.
Yep.
And so I was never north of the locker room. I was never in Amherst, Tonawanda, Clarence. I didn't even know where that was growing up. Okay. And so for me, a Southtowns guy coming out of the Navy now, I'm 35 years old at this point. I'm married. I got 4 kids. And so my wife says we're moving to Tonawanda. God, I might as well move to Canada.
What is this foreign land here? What's going on?
And so, I moved to Tonawanda, and like I said, I served in the DA's office for a couple years, and then, I decided to make a run for office in Tonawanda. Now, I don't know anyone in Tonawanda. No, I've been living here now for a couple years.
Right.
My kids now are all in the Tonawanda public school system. So, my kids are obviously ingratiated in the community, okay, and are involved in the community. My wife is from Tonawanda. So she grew up in Tonawanda, went to Kenmore East High School, so, she had a lot of, family and friends in Tonawanda. So I had that going for me.
She probably helped your campaign tremendously.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I had that going for me. But personally, I had, no connection to Tonawanda. I had no roots in Tonawanda. So if you think about it, it was kind of crazy me to think that, after living there only 2 years, I'm going to run for office in Tonawanda. But I did. I rolled the dice, and I ran for the town council in Tonawanda, and I won. I won, and I served on the town board for a number of years. And then the opportunity came for me to become a judge. Right. One of the town judges in Tonawanda left to become a Supreme Court judge. My dear friend, Judge Frank Caruso. He left the bench in Tonawanda, became a Supreme Court judge. There was now an opening on the town judge. I got appointed to that position, and then I had to run that year. And I ran for the town judge that year, was fortunate enough to win again, and I became a judge. And so, that was a great experience. It was, obviously, you see things now from a different perspective. I had been, I've been a lawyer now for, almost 12 years. Yeah.
You said now you're refereeing.
Now I'm refereeing.
Yeah.
So I've been a lawyer now. This is actually, I'm sorry, 10 years. I got admitted to the bar in 1996, and this is 2006. So I'd only been a lawyer 10 years, which isn't a long time to be a judge. I kind of I joke around too to my dear friend Judge Craig Hanna, who's a Supreme Court judge now here in Buffalo. Judge Hanna was appointed as a Buffalo City Court judge a few months before me to Tonawanda. So I can't say I was the first one in my law school class to become a judge. I was second. Judge Hanna beat me by a couple months.
Yeah, that would have been nice, right?
So Judge Hanna beat me by a couple months. And so I'd only been a lawyer for about 10 years. I was 40 years old, so relatively young, and relatively inexperienced, quite frankly, by being a lawyer only 10 years. But I picked it up, and it was like you said, Nick, a totally different perspective in kind of being a referee now and adjudicating cases, in criminal cases. And traffic court cases in town court in Tonawanda. And then I also got appointed an acting Buffalo City Court judge as well. So I did criminal matters and civil matters in Buffalo City Court. So I got a good perspective by being a judge, doing, everything, civil, criminal, and traffic court.
Wow. Was there any specific court case that when you were behind the bench, this one just stood out to you more than any others?
Well, it's very rare that you get to be a judge at a civil jury trial in Buffalo City Court.
Why is that?
Because most of the civil trials are in state Supreme Court.
Okay.
But if the dollar amount of the proceeding is not like, $1 million case, it's a smaller level case. Back then, I'm not sure they're still doing it now, but back then, some of the Supreme Court judges would send the matter down to Buffalo City Court, okay? And the majority of the time, they would settle. Well, I actually had one that did not settle. I actually had a civil jury case. It was a contract case that went to trial, and the parties wanted a jury. So we had a jury trial on a civil matter in Buffalo City Court that I was a presiding judge on. That's very unusual. I bet there's probably been a handful of them in the past 50 years here in the city of Buffalo. Yeah, very, very, very unusual. And so I did that. So that's kind of what stood out. And quite frankly, it wasn't it wasn't any of the criminal cases that I did because again in town in Buffalo City Court, most of the all the criminal cases are misdemeanor cases. They're all DWIs, bar fights, that kind of stuff. So none of them really stood out to me, quite frankly. Now that I think about it. But the one civil case that I had to do a jury trial on, that's really what sticks out to me now I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. So from there, then, was there anything in between that I'm missing of getting to DA?
Yeah, I left the bench, which is very unusual, okay? Most judges...
Oh, they stay on
for forever.
For life, right?
They like that black robe, okay?
Yeah.
So most judges, very few judges leave the bench. And they do leave when they get forced off for retirement.
Right. Yeah. So why'd you leave then?
I voluntarily left the bench because I wanted to do something different. I just like doing different things, quite frankly. And so I left the bench voluntarily to become the town attorney in Tonawanda. Now, during the whole time here, as I'm on the town board and I'm a town judge, I still had a private law practice going on. So I still practice law, on the side, doing personal injury work, while I was the town attorney, the town councilman and a town and Buffalo City Court judge. So I still had that going on. I still was in the Navy Reserves. I also, during this time, at some point, became an adjunct professor at Buff State. So at one point...
Yeah, a lot going on, huh?
At one point, Nick, I had 5 jobs.
Yeah.
I was a Tonawanda town judge. I was a Buffalo acting city court judge. I was in the Navy Reserves. I was a adjunct professor at Buff State, and I had my private law practice. So at one point during this time...
Is that all, John, or what?
That's it. I had 5 kids, that's why. I had 5 mouths to feed, okay? So I figured I need 5 jobs to feed those 5 mouths, okay? And so, but with 5 kids, I had to work.
I love it. I love it.
But I left the bench, which eliminated 2 of those 5 jobs, and I substituted them with being town attorney. So at this stage of the game, for about 5 years there, I only had 4 jobs. I maintained my law practice, stayed still in the reserves, still is a adjunct at Buff State. I taught a moot court class at Buff State in the political science department, and now I'm town attorney in Tonawanda. And so I did that for about 5 years, and then the opportunity in 2016 arose to run for DA. And that obviously was a major turning point in my life. That was
for sure.
That was probably the the biggest decision I had to make going back to when I was 22, I'm graduating college, and I'm making the decision as to whether or not to join the Navy at 22 in 1988. At this point now, in 2015-16, I'm 49, and 27 years has now gone by since I was 22. And 27 years later, the first big decision I made in my life to go in the Navy, 27 years later, at age 49 now, I made another huge decision to give up my law practice, which was going pretty good. I was going to take a significant pay cut to become the DA, and I had 5 kids.
Yep.
I had 2 in college at the time, and not only from a financial standpoint was it a huge decision, but it was also a huge decision because now, if you become the DA, you are in the public eye, and your private life is over.
Yeah, forget about it.
Is over. And being the town board member and being a judge and being a town attorney, those are all public sector jobs.
Yeah, but this is another level.
This is another level.
Yeah.
This is another level, obviously. And so I talked to my wife, obviously, who I don't make a decision without consulting with. I talked to my wife, and she was, go for it. And so I went for it.
Yeah.
I went for it, and it was running for DA was unlike running for the town board and running for judge. This was, like you said, Nick, at a whole nother level, and I had a pretty contested election. I had a primary, contested primary, where I was running against the incumbent DA. Mm-hmm. The reason why there was an opening here was because the district attorney at the time, Frank Sedita, became a judge. He became, I seem to follow guys who become judges. He became a judge.
So that's a great opening for you.
Yeah, he became a judge, Supreme Court judge, and now the DA position is open. By operation of law, the deputy district attorney becomes the acting DA automatically by operation of law in New York State. So the deputy district attorney was a guy named Michael Flaherty, and he became the acting DA. Well, he was going to run for DA too that year. So I had to run against the incumbent, the acting DA, who was, as the viewers know, if you're the DA, you're on TV every day. Mm-hmm. You're on TV every day. You're on the radio every day. You're in the paper every day. Your name's on the paper.
Power of the media.
And so, I had to run against the sitting DA who is in the media every day. And so it was a tough race.
Yep.
And I had to run in a Democratic primary. So I ran in a Democratic primary, and I was fortunate enough to win. And then on top of that, I had to run in the general election in November against the Republican candidate. Mm-hmm. And so I had that race, and I was running against another military guy. My opponent in the Republican general election was a career Air Force JAG, who was a colonel in the Air Force,
right,
and had retired as an Air Force colonel, and was a great guy, an honorable guy. His name was Joe Traynor, who served his country honorably for 30 years and was a retired full bird colonel in the Air Force.
Right.
And now he retires from the Air Force, comes back to Buffalo, and now wants to run for DA. And I got now I got to go against him.
Yeah. Well.
And so I was fortunate enough to beat him. Again, the Navy's always on top. Nick, always remember.
Yeah.
That,
Okay.
Nick, always remember this right here. Okay. Who went in and got Bin Laden? Okay. The Navy SEALs.
Okay.
It wasn't the Army Green Berets or Delta Force or Marines Special Forces. Okay. Remember, the Navy went in and got Bin Laden. Okay. So
there we go.
Always remember that.
There we go.
Okay.
You all heard it here.
You all heard it here. All right. They sent the Navy in to get him. And so, again, very fortunate and blessed, quite frankly, to win that. And I won the DA in 2016 and became the Erie County DA on January 1st, 2017.
I got to ask you, what are some of the ugly side of politics when running?
God. We don't have enough time.
Yeah,
for that,
yeah,
man.
you know.
We can
So
be here all day, man.
let's pick one that maybe it was a personal experience, that you've had that you're just like, man, this is a blood sport.
Well, I'll be honest with you. The biggest disappointment that I had was actually before I became DA, and I was actually a candidate briefly for DA 8 years prior in 2008. Okay? So in 2008, there was also a vacancy for district attorney. The longtime DA, Frank Clark, retired in 2008. And I threw my name in the hat along with Judge Sedita and others back in 2008. And, it looked like I was going to be the Democratic candidate for that position up until the end, and it didn't go my way. Judge Sedita got it. No hard feelings. It's a big boy sport. It's politics. But obviously, I was disappointed. Yeah. And I saw, some things in politics that I didn't like during that process. Fast forward to 2015, about a year before I ran for DA. I was up for a judgeship, an appointment by the governor. Not this governor, but the previous governor.
Yeah.
I was up for an appointment by the governor, and I was being told, you're looking good. It looks like it's going to go your way. Again, nothing's certain in politics until it happens, okay? So again, I'm a big boy. I understand that. But that process of, kind of thinking that I'm going to get it, it got pulled out from under the rug under me as well at that time too, okay? And it didn't work out.
Oh, politics, huh?
Politics. But it's here. Again, I don't blame anyone for that. I got no regrets. And now look with that judgeship, okay, and that would have been a full-time judgeship, okay. With that judgeship, it's actually a blessing because if I would have got that, I would have never been DA. Okay.
Yeah, and that's the way of looking at it. For
by
sure.
not getting that was the best thing ever happened to me.
Right.
So now I'm free and clear to run for DA, and like I said, I did in 2016, and was thankful to the voters of Erie County Thank you to all the voters out there who voted for me, and it was an honor to be elected, and obviously an honor to serve.
What was crazy was the top shooting.
No, that was by far the biggest.
Biggest, and that's what I wanted.
That was by far the biggest case we ever had.
Right, that's what I want to.
That was.
If you could elaborate on,
Sure. I mean that was.
Nuts.
It's funny. I was just talking about that to someone this morning over coffee.
Oh wow.
That was by it's the biggest crime ever committed in the history of Buffalo. All right, hands down. So in the long history of our city, the long history of Erie County, Western New York, however geographically you want to frame the issue or frame the territory, it was by far the biggest crime we've ever had. Okay, and obviously the biggest incident that I ever had in my 8 years as DA, 2 terms. So if it's funny how we're gonna piggyback off different parts of this podcast here in my interview here. Let's go back to 2001 to 9/11.
Okay.
If you recall, on 9/11 that morning, President Bush was in a classroom in Florida reading a class a book.
The guy whispering in his ear, right there. Yeah.
So he's in a classroom in Florida at an elementary school. He's got the book, and here he's there in the chair in front, and he's reading the book to the class, who are all seated on the floor in front of him. And when the first plane hit, one of his aides, you can see in the video, of him reading the book, one of his aides came over and whispered in his ear what happened. And you could see the consternation in his face.
Oh, totally.
And he didn't want to alarm the class by just walking up and leaving. Okay, he actually got criticized for not leaving right away, which is ridiculous. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's kind of absurd.
It's absurd.
Too.
Okay.
Yeah.
He kept his composure. You can see the consternation in his face.
Oh yeah.
And he continued to read, and then when it was done, he then obviously left immediately and went back to Washington. Okay. Mm-hmm. Fast forward now to May 14th, 2022, and I am the DA now. I've been the DA about 6 years now. So I did my first 4-year term. I got reelected in 2020. I didn't have any opposition then, so I had no race then. Every political party endorsed me. I got endorsed by the Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, working family. Every political party endorsed me in 2020, so I had no opponent. And so I was reelected, in quotation marks. And then, I'm 2 years now, almost a year, about a year and a half into my second term. And I am on the podium at the University of Buffalo Law School graduation. Okay? So, for those of you out there, who are not lawyers, who didn't go to UB, the University of Buffalo, at their commencement ceremony for law school, they invite dignitaries, judges, alumni to sit on the dais during the law school commencement ceremony. Mm-hmm. In your cap and gown.
Cap and gown.
So in regalia, okay.
Yeah.
For professors and faculty, whatever, alumni, I was invited, and here I am in full-blown cap and gown on the dais at the commencement of the 2022 University of Buffalo Law School class.
Yeah. Wow. God.
And I can hear my phone blowing up. So I've always got my phone in my pocket here, okay?
Yeah.
and I had on. Well, I didn't have a sport coat on. I wouldn't have had a sport coat on with a cap and gown, but I would have had pants on, obviously. Okay, so I had my cell phone in my pocket, and
it's buzzing.
I had it on vibrate, and I can feel it blowing up. Okay, and so at one point I kind of like get in the cap and gown there, okay, and pull it out, and I'm on the dais, so the podium people are out in front of me here, so I don't want to be rude, okay,
right.
So I kind of like did one of these, and looked down, and okay, and so Commissioner Gramalia, Buffalo Police Commissioner, is buzzing me. There's been a shooting, a mass shooting, and so I look at it, okay, and I'm just kind of looking, so I didn't want to be rude here, okay, so I just I put it back in my pocket for a second, and I'm thinking about what do I do here? Do I like read it in full in front of the people? So I'm kind of just thinking about what to do, but by this point, I had my security guard is over on the side of the auditorium, and out of sight, okay, and my security guard, I don't know if I think she came on the stage, but I saw her walking up, okay, coming, my peripheral vision, okay, and I looked over, and she's like this, and so, and I knew it was important, so I got up in the middle of the ceremony, and they took me off the stage.
So everyone knew something was up.
So everyone knew something up.
Something's up.
And so, I was, by now I could look at my cell phone. She's telling me what's happening here. And I literally take off the cap and gown there, okay, dump it on the side. Someone was there. We'll take care of it, Mr. Flynn,
Yeah,
And got in my car and went to Tops. Went to the scene right away.
Mm-hmm.
In 8 years, almost 8 years as DA, Nick, that was the only crime scene I ever went to. Your typical homicide. Unfortunately, we had a lot of homicides in Buffalo. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Your typical homicide. I never went to the crime scene. Some DAs do that. Okay, but that's just not me. Okay, I don't want let the police handle it. All right. Let my DA, my ADAs, my homicide prosecutors, they can go. They don't need me there. Okay.
But this one,
obviously, my security detail took me right to Tops, and obviously, it was a scene that I never saw before. We were set up in the parking lot at an abandoned lot across from the Tops, in the parking lot of Tops. The bodies were still on the ground in the parking lot.
Jesus, yeah.
Covered, obviously. It was a full-blown yellow tape crime scene. Police cars, fire engines, first responders, all over the place.
What's going on in your head? Like, you're seeing all this in real time.
I'm gathering information. What's going on? So I didn't really have time to think about what's going on in my head.
You got to act.
It was just what's going on here. So the Buffalo Police Department has kind of like a mobile command center. It's like a big RV, all right? And it's a mobile command center. And so they brought their mobile command center to the parking lot across the street from Tops in an abandoned lot. It wasn't a park. It was I guess it was a parking lot, but it was an abandoned lot there across the street on Jefferson Avenue. And we set up the RV, the BPD, the command center there. And we literally went inside the RV, Buffalo Police, Sheriff, State Troopers, FBI, all of our federal partners, and we talked about what we're going to do. our game plan. And, like I said, I was telling someone this morning over coffee. We literally decided and made decisions right there on the spot, in the parking lot, at the command center, almost immediately, where we had such a good relationship amongst all of our law enforcement partners, where we said, okay, we in the state, Buffalo Police Department and the DA's office, will handle the crime scene here at Tops, the actual Tops supermarket, and he had a car that he drove here in the parking lot with computers and ammunition and guns in his car.
In there, yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So we said, all right, Buffalo Police Department and DA's office, we'll take the crime scene here, and the FBI and the feds, you guys take the house that he lived in Broome County. So that's literally how we did it. Just, we didn't have to call DC or get permission.
No.
We did it right there on the spot. FBI, feds, you take that, we'll take this.
Done.
And it was done right there.
Oh my goodness
right
gracious.
And we did. And we
Unbelievable.
And we started our investigation and started our prosecution. We got ours done, obviously, right away, within 6 months. The feds is going to take longer because they're going for the death penalty. We don't have a death penalty in New York. So he pled guilty to the highest charge.
Yeah.
First one ever in the history of New York to plead guilty to the domestic terrorism motivated by hate charge.
First ever.
First ever in New York. First ever in New York, right here in Buffalo. He pled guilty to that, and he'll be in jail without parole, never get out, rest of his life.
Thank God.
Thank God. But if the feds continue to proceed with the death penalty, that could take years, obviously. He may get executed if he's found, if he goes through that process. But at a minimum, we in the state got him for never getting out of jail.
My goodness. Wow. That whole thing was so sad to see. And unfortunately, my sister, she's in high school. She was telling me when that happened, or maybe it was middle school at the time. She was like, the video is circulating.
Oh my gosh.
Kids seeing that. And I'm just like,
It's awful.
And you don't, I mean, when you see that, you're kind of, how do you, especially young kids, because with social media now, that's a whole nother story. But all this stuff circulates, and whether on X or whatever platform, it's hard for kids not to see things. Just public.
What made that doubly worse, if doubly is a word or not?
I've used it. I don't know if it is either, but I've used it.
What made that doubly worse is not only the crime, the shooting, the carnage that took place that afternoon, but the reasoning for the carnage, which in this sick individual's mind was racist. I'm not only going to shoot people, I'm not only going to kill people, which obviously in and of itself is atrocious, but I'm going to shoot people and I'm going to kill people just because they're African American. That's what made this worse, quite frankly.
It's so sick.
I unfortunately,
So sick.
there's probably on average 50 homicides a year, in Erie County. And so, you do the math, and, in my 8 years, you're talking, 400 homicides, in my time. And you get 400 homicides, that's 400 people who've lost their life. That's 400 dead people, which is awful, okay? But on this particular day, you had 10 all at once.
That's crazy.
And you had 10 all at once who the only reason why they were dead all at once was because of the color of their skin. And so that's what made this, obviously, you talk about whole nother levels, a whole nother level. A whole nother level of just pure evil. And so, yeah, that was obviously the biggest event, incident, crime, however you want to phrase it, in my time as a DA.
Well, John, obviously you've seen a lot, from your leadership positions and what you've done throughout your career. To really just sum it up, for my audience with, being in private practice, public service, combining those two things together, I still think leadership is applicable to any industry, regardless of what you're in. What would you say, and you might have said it before in the podcast, but just to touch on it again, some personal traits that you think make a great leader based on your experience, and also, too, how you should go about leading an organization, whether someone's in business, leading family, leading people. What's your message?
So there are two conceptual parts and answers to that question. The first part is you always have to keep focus and have as part of your DNA, I keep going back to that phrase, as part of your DNA, your foundation of being a leader, the mantra of always do the right thing. That is paramount. You always have to, every decision you make, every task that you encounter, you always have to do it, task it, supervise it, lead it with the thought of the right thing, doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. That's the first part of that question. The second part of that question is, and it piggybacks on always do the right thing. The second part is you have to do the right thing and do whatever you're going to do and make whatever decision you're going to make without worrying about what other people think.
Amen to that.
Without worrying about what other people think.
Mm-hmm. People care about that way too much.
Because if you go about and you are always thinking about what's this person going to think, what's that person going to think, and for me, as the elected official of Erie County, countywide, got about 1 million people in Erie County. So I got 1 million people that I got to worry about. Because 1 million people in Erie County are paying my salary. And I'm serving 1 million people in Erie County. So if I thought about what every person in Erie County, all 1 million of them, are thinking on any given day at any given time, I would have been paralyzed. I mean, you talk about paralysis by analysis, okay?
Yep.
I would have been paralyzed. And so I learned right away, you can't worry about what other people think. Mm-hmm. You got to do the right thing. And you got to just take the consequences as they come. And so that, to me, those two concepts, do the right thing and do it without worrying about what other people think. You put those two together and you're a great leader.
That's it.
Bottom line.
John, thank you so much. This was great. Pleasure.
Absolutely, buddy. Thank you.